Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation. I'm jumping out of the Old Testament after Numbers wrapped up yesterday and into the New Testament and picking up in the chapters 1 through 5 in Mark. This is the second time to get to go through the gospel of Jesus, His story, the reason why we would believe that He is who He says He is, and a retelling of His teachings. So here in Mark, we don't start with the birth of Jesus or that level of proof of His where He descended from, His bloodline. We start directly at getting to know John the Baptist, and the proof here is laid out from the fact that John the Baptist was this foretelling of Elijah returning and making the way straight for Jesus to come. And we start with the baptism of Jesus. I did take a look here. It's not really what I want to focus on, but I have to mention that I dug into this idea of baptism. And we could really have many episodes on the idea of baptism. It wasn't new. It was something that this idea of water cleansing was throughout the world at the time, the ancient world, in different cultures. And in the Jewish tradition, it was accepted that cleaning with water, rinsing with water, was part of something that was able to clean you, make you, we talk about clean and unclean, where we just came out of the Old Testament. It was able to make you acceptable again. And in the Jewish faith at the time, though it wasn't suggested that water would be part of you repenting. Typically only the Gentile converts, people that weren't in the Jewish faith, would go through a baptism, because the Jews are already grafted in and they are already promised. But for John the Baptist to make headway here, he had to find receptivity in the Jewish person that would go and be baptized. And so he was speaking to the Jewish people, and a certain segment of them were receptive to this idea that they were paying attention to their history, to their sacred texts. They were on watch for Jesus coming, and so they were convinced enough by John the Baptist that they needed to get ready for this new covenant, for this new person that was coming, that they underwent baptism as well. And it's an acknowledgement that, again, that many of the Jews were coming to the understanding that they weren't going to get to hold on to salvation strictly by their birth in a specific family that is tied into a lineage that goes back to Abraham. They were becoming convinced that that wasn't working out and that God was bringing something new into being. And so they were receptive. And we go through a lot of the teachings here. The paralytic that was lowered through the roof. We have healings. We have Pharisees that are trying to challenge Jesus. And the thing that really I wanted to talk about that kind of goes along with this idea of receptivity was the parable of the sower of soils. And I've just read it a few weeks back in Matthew. And even in reading Jesus's explanation, I kind of took it at face value, and in the way that I've always taken this parable, where we're kind of seeing this, the soil is kind of just it represents people. So the soil itself has always represented people, and the word falls on these people, and some of them do something with it, and some of them get excited and then wander away. But this time when I read it, there were some distinctions in the language that this author, and it is widely believed that Mark, who was a companion of Peter, is the one that wrote this, but it is sort of up in the air. We have a different person who's telling the story, who's writing down Jesus's words, and they're really, really close, but they're just a little bit different. And that's what's so lovely about reading the same stories over and over again, is that you're getting somebody else's different perspective. And so this sower of the soils, the way that he reported the distinctions in the language that Jesus used, made me think about this in a deeper level, made me think about the soil in us. So it's an oversimplification perhaps to see that the parable is making you think that man is the soil. I think that it could be talking about you needing to examine your own soil and what the quality of that soil is, and is it healthy, and is it deep, and is it enriched. I'm a closet soil science junkie, and I think anybody who gets into sustainable gardening or farming, you sort of have to become this soil science junkie. But I think about how soil is formed, and when soil is really unhealthy and it's not rich and it hasn't been filled with all of the richness of creation that's all around, that's what compost, that's what brings organic matter to the soil to build it. When that soil is unhealthy, it's very difficult to get something to grow in it. And if we are looking at the soil of our body, if we're looking at the soil of our soul, it's hard to say soil and soul at the same time. If we're looking at the soil of our minds, we have to be thinking here. When Jesus explains, he's talking about how the word lands, how his word, what he is teaching in the law, and what he is showing us in creation, the soil matters in how that seed that he is dropping lands. And so we have this idea of, or this imagery of the soil that just drops and doesn't have a chance. It just gets whisked away by the evil one. There is the soil that falls on rocky ground, and here it says, this is what set me to look at this differently. It says that the seed sprang up very quickly, and if you have a seed that springs up really quickly, it speaks to the fact that it hasn't put much time into putting down a root. And this would happen in very thin, very poor soil that's very hard. And we talk a lot about hardened hearts, hardened spirits. But, and I think perhaps we're meant to kind of see that here. When a seed hits soil like that, the first thing any seed does is put down a root. It never puts up leaves first. But the first thing that seed is going to do as it starts to crack open is to drop a root down. And this is where, and if you've just planted a garden, you may plant a seed and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And it seems like it's never going to show. You're trying to weed, but you want to make sure you don't knock out what you planted on purpose. So you're being really careful, and it'd be so much more helpful if it would come above ground and you could identify where to protect the ground and where to weed, but it doesn't show up for a long time. And that is because if you have rich soil, that seed is spending all of that time that you're waiting putting down a dense, deep, very firm root, a healthy root that is capable of gathering nutrition from not just below itself, but out from the surrounding soils. It is plugging into the mycorrhizal relationships that are there. It is establishing itself before it goes above ground. If it gets blocked because the soil is hard, or there isn't very much, if your soil is very, very thin before it gets to that subsoil where there's no nutrition, your root will often just be very small or very wispy or go sideways. If you've ever grown a carrot that does that, it goes sideways instead of developing this beautiful foundation. It grows a little bit and then it's used up all of its energy trying to create this tiny little root that is fighting to use what's there and fighting against the rock. And eventually it's used up all of the energy that it can spare inside what's been packed inside the seed food-wise. And it's got to get above ground to get the photosynthesis started, because that's when the leaves come out. It has just about run out of the packed lunch that it was given from the parent plant. And it now needs to produce its own food because there's nothing left in the seed. So these leaves come out and they start to photosynthesize. If the seed has fallen on ground that is very thin and very rocky, that root is very tiny and insubstantial. And so any hardship that comes, if the sun comes and bakes, that little seedling has no chance. It has no chance to go deep and find water or use thread-like side roots, we call them adventitious roots, to go and seek food, water, nutrition. It's all on its own. It didn't get a good root and it dies. And that's the same thing that can happen if our soil, if the body isn't healthy, if our tissues aren't healthy, if we are choosing to make up our tissues from what is available that is so-called food, that is causing us to divert energy to sustaining around a dysfunction and an illness, an imbalance, pain, the more we divert energy to that, as the seed of the word falls into our flesh, our root that comes with that word is not strong. It does not have a chance to get a firm foundation because our energy is so diverted. And so when the first test comes and something comes along and we get baked or we get challenged or we get ill, the root of that word isn't enough to keep our tiny fledgling faith alight, and it dies. We see the other seed that he talks about with the word dropping is the person who just gets the tiny little baby faith that's growing from the seed that dropped gets choked out because somebody's too focused on all the things that they have to do every day and all the wealth that they want to gather and all the things that they have. And so the tiny faith plant dies. I think it's so much more useful and so much deeper and richer to see this instead of seeing man as soil. If we turn it and make this more individual, and we turn and we look at our soil and how the seed of the word, what are we giving in terms of a seed bed? Are we clearing the weeds of our life out of the way so that we're not focused and we allow that new plant to grow? Are we making sure that our soil is deep and rich and capable of accessing nutrition and moisture so that that plant can grow? Are we tending our soil so that the word can grow? I pray that God is blessing you today and that He is working on you to fix your soil outside and inside, and that He brings you back to be curious with me on another day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Dawn Combs Really.